Well, welcome everyone to our special Big Ten Earth Day spotlight with the brilliant and talented Dominique Browning and Vicki Patton. This Earth Day, we can feel more hopeful about tackling the many, many environmental problems our world is facing. We have in Joe Biden a president who's fiercely committed to embedding climate work into every area of the federal government. And we have a House of Representatives and a Senate with slim majorities also committed to making real progress. But we have to act quickly and we have to act boldly. Science doesn't give us any other option. Just today, the president committed to a 50% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2030, so we are very excited that change is at hand. Dominique Browning has done it all: journalist, editor, author, gardener, activist, mother, grandmother. She built and now runs Mom's Clean Air Force. She will tell us the mom story. Vicki Patton has spent the past 30 years working to secure landmark national and state protections addressing climate and air pollution. She's general counsel at Environmental Defense Fund and earlier served in the EPA's Office of General Counsel, where she implemented the historic 1990 Clean Air Act amendments. Vicki will talk to us about the EPA and its essential role moving us into a clean air future. Dominique, Vicki, and I are co-founders of Mom's Clean Air Force, which has more than 1 million moms and dads united to protect children from air pollution and climate change. There are many groups working on climate, but I'm especially proud to have worked beside these two remarkable women to get moms off the ground. Before we get started, mark your calendars for our next events. Tuesday, the 27th of April at noon, we have Jed Legume, founder and author of the Popular Information newsletter. Tuesday, May 11th at noon, we have Louise Dubé, executive director of iCivics. And our next spotlight speaker, 5 weeks from yesterday, on Wednesday, the 26th of May at 7 p.m. is Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Oh.
Okay, so on with the show. Dominique and Vicki will talk for about half an hour and then we'll have a Q&A. Live transcript is enabled, so just click on the button at the bottom if you want to have a transcript, a live transcript. Please put your questions in the chat, and now over to Dominique.
Thank you so much, Sue. And as always, thank you for your incredible inspiration and support of Mom's Clean Air Force and Environmental Defense Fund. I'm so happy to be talking to you this week after Anne Applebaum's wonderful talk last week, because it follows on very nicely. She talked about how we need to have a government that works in order to protect democracy, and how we need to remind people what the government can do for them. And at Mom's Clean Air Force, I've often talked about how we want to re-engage old-fashioned habits of citizenship. So I thought this evening I would give you a little bit of the journey to Moms, my journey and our journey as an organization, because I thought it might be relevant to all of you launching Big Tent and I hope having very, very big ambitions for your Big Tent. I was a magazine editor for many years at lots of different magazines, and most recently at House and Garden, which closed in 2007, somewhat to my shock. While I was at House and Garden, I had a lot of interest in ecological and climate matters. And in fact, we had columns by Lizzie Colbert and Bill McKibben, and columns on how you could find toxic-free materials, things like that. And we watched as gardeners, as garden zones were redefined because the world was getting warmer. When the magazine folded, I decided to kind of take a just say yes approach and say yes to every single idea that came my way, no matter how off the wall it was. And that actually resulted in a meeting with Sue, who I did not know, but she was introduced by mutual friends. And she had an idea that definitely fit in my just say yes. And that was to write about EDF's work in the environment the way, Sue blithely said, the way you write about sofas and roses and buildings. And I, of course, said yes. So I began to interview people at EDF about nitrogen runoff and building efficiency and that kind of thing. And I would get to the end of these interviews and say, you know, this sounds really interesting, but I can't understand half of what you have just said. Because what I saw was that people were very used to shorthand, scientists talking to scientists and regulators talking to regulators, economists to economists. And no one was really thinking about how do you talk to people like me who are interested and who need and want to be engaged, but can't understand. At the time, this was sort of post-Waxman-Markey, which was the biggest effort to get climate pollution under control in 2009. A bill that did not even come to a vote, never made it to the Senate floor. And I think it's probably safe to say that in the environmental world, a massive depression took hold. There was no legislation in the works on climate change, and it made it very difficult for people to know how to move forward. Also at that time, though, was the beginning of blogging and the beginning of a group of people who were called mommy bloggers, self-defined mommy bloggers. And so in 2010, I wrote a column called Eco Moms. Sue pounced. And we immediately began conversations about how to take all that passion those mothers were displaying online, a passion to protect their children. How do we marry that passion to politics and to making serious change, serious, big, bold, transformative change? The mommy bloggers were all about what they could buy to make their children safer, what kind of air filters and what kind of baby bottles that didn't have BPA, but that's not the answer. I also felt like it was time to change the conversation from polar bears to people. So we decided to launch Mom's Clean Air Force. And given my background, it was started as a website because I naturally thought, well, if people read about what's going on, they'll be so alarmed, they will do something. But as I said, there was no legislation to participate in. And that's when I started talking to Vicki Patton, because in fact, there was a great deal of regulatory action happening under President Obama. And Vicki was working on what sounded really intriguing to me at the time, something I knew nothing about, something called the Mercury and Air Toxics Rule. Now, those of us who have children may remember when we were pregnant being told, don't eat tuna fish or any other big fatty fish because it is contaminated with mercury. But no one ever told me, and I certainly never even wondered how that mercury got into the fish. And it turns out it comes from coal-fired power plants. Emissions that go into the air, rain down into the water, transfer into methylmercury, get into the fish, move up the fish chain, the food chain, where they actually get stronger, more amplified. And mercury is a heavy metal that is a biolipid, loves fatty tissue. And when a pregnant woman eats fish that has mercury, really, we now know that it crosses the placental barrier, crosses the blood-brain barrier, and in fact does get into the developing fetus, where the only fat is in the brain. Mercury is a potent neurotoxin, and no scientist will tell you that there's any amount of mercury that is safe. I was shocked that this was happening, that there weren't laws against this or rules against this, and we got to work. Along with mercury, by the way, come arsenic, lead, nickel, chromium, acid gases, all those heavy metals. So we began to educate people and began to engage them with EPA on fighting to strengthen mercury regulations from coal-fired power plants. At the same time, I was somewhat unhappy that I wasn't able to work on climate change. And I had a conversation with Fred Krupp in passing, who said something that really was transformative for Mom's Clean Air Force. And that was, he pointed out that if we were able to shut down the coal-fired power plants that caused so much mercury pollution, the plants that are so rackety and antiquated that you don't even want to invest money to put scrubbers on them to clean up the emissions. If we could shut those down, we would go a very long way to solving a lot of carbon emissions into the air, a lot of climate pollution. So that made me understand this interconnectivity of air pollution and climate change. And I began to talk about and write about climate pollution, which set scientists' teeth on edge because it's not thought of as pollution. They're emissions, carbon and methane emissions. But for regular people, pollution is something we understand, and I can make the case that this is pollution. As we began to learn more, we realized we needed to add organizers in the field to train mothers to talk to legislators, because it wasn't enough to sign petitions, even though that remains incredibly important. I don't think I'm ever going to forget the first time I went to visit a legislator at a state house, having climbed these marble stairs in front of a mahogany door, twice the size of us, with marble walls in front of us. And this mother turning to me with real fear in her voice saying, "Are you sure it's legal for us to be here?" And I had to assure her that actually these are people who are working for us, and this is our house. When I was at Newsweek, I was lucky enough to be taken under Kay Graham's wing, and she used to joke with me that I was lucky that I met her when she had become, at a rather advanced age, a feminist. And Kay is the person who taught me basically how to stand up in a room full of men, which is what Newsweek was, and present ideas that they might not understand, and how to have a polished presentation. In fact, I think the first thing she did was send me to the hairdresser. But it was really great training. So the first time I took mothers to go meet with a governor, actually, we were giving a town hall presentation, and the mother showed up with a baby and her toddler. The babysitter had become ill, and there was no one to take care of the children. She marched onto the stage to give her presentation, which was quite powerful. And suddenly I noticed the baby was reaching into her mother's shirt, obviously hungry, and the toddler was pulling on her skirt and doing a pretty good job of starting to pull it down. And at first I was horrified, and then I thought, no, this is what it is about. And it was another transformative moment. I am not training lobbyists who become professional lobbyists, although they may decide to go on and do that. I want real people in front of their elected officials saying, look, this is what it is about, my family. That's who I'm fighting for. So we wear our red t-shirts in the hallways of the Senate and when we go visit representatives, and they've now become so identified that senators literally poke their heads out the door and say, "Here come the moms," which is kind of great. That was another transformative moment with Sue, who introduced me to Cecile Richards, who said to me, probably like a scene out of The Graduate, one word, plastics. Cecile said, t-shirts. T-shirts are incredibly important. And I never would have thought about it, but she was absolutely right. And she talked about the sea of shirts from Planned Parenthood when there were Supreme Court events that people watching, and how dramatic it was. So over the years, we came to understand what works. And what works is what all of you at Big Tent want to do, and that is pressure, pressure, pressure. Letting politicians know day after day, week after week, month after month, that they must vote the right way and that you care. One of the things I've learned in my daily civics lesson is that there are thousands of bills floating around all the time. And politicians only focus on the ones that they think are going to get them good attention among their voters. And it really does make a difference. So MOMS has evolved to do two kinds of work. One is legislative and one is regulatory. And Vicki will be talking to you soon about the regulatory work. On the legislative side, under the last administration, we obviously had no laws to pass to protect us from climate pollution. However, there was an enormous amount of work going on at the state level, and largely inspired because of Obama's Clean Power Plan, which got states working on how to cut their carbon and methane pollution. So we got to work very, very deeply on cutting carbon pollutions, helping support methane rules, especially in places like Pennsylvania and Colorado. Now we're very lucky to have a president who is sending a very strong message about getting climate emissions under control, and as well as strong message about doing so bearing environmental justice and injustice at the forefront of the efforts. So what we're watching right now is obviously the jobs plan, and most especially that infrastructure that should be built out to support electric vehicles, because no one's going to buy vehicles if they're afraid of not being able to plug them in and charge them up. Tailpipe pollution is the biggest contributor to climate pollution. Therefore, transportation is an incredibly important front for us to work on. We also are surrounding bills about electrification of school buses. The inside air that our children are breathing when they're going to school is actually worse than what's coming outside. And of course, it's bad for the drivers too. So this is a very important bill and very easy fix, but it takes money. All of this electrification means that the electric grid needs to be cleaned up, and we need more research and development on new kinds of energy and on storage. So we are clamoring to our legislators to push infrastructure. MOMS has tried throughout its history to be bipartisan, to work for bipartisan causes. That is at times more fruitful than other times. Clearly, in the past, it has not been at all easy. And I'm hopeful now that that might be opening up. And one of the things that gives me hope is another bill that MOMS is supporting, and we would love your help with. And believe it or not, it's about plugging orphan wells. These are wells, fracked wells from the oil and gas industry that are left behind. Owners have gone bankrupt, left the state. They're still spewing methane, but even worse, that methane is getting into the fissures that are fracked open and contaminating drinking water, and therefore drinking water and irrigation water, and therefore getting into water supplies. I had no idea that there was even such a thing as an orphan well problem, but it is enormous. It's incredibly undocumented. There's a possibility that there are 500,000 to 1 million idled and orphan wells out there, and it is across the country. The reason I'm excited about this bill is that it actually is bringing together a really interesting coalition of people, including labor unions, because it involves a lot of jobs to plug these wells, governors who want the money from the federal government, green groups, because obviously we need to plug these sources of pollution. So it's a bill that could build a very unusual alliance of Republican and Democratic politicians, which is terrific. We need more of those. Coming up, there's a Congressional Review Act on methane. And what that means is basically a resolution to make it possible, clear the way for EPA to get back to work regulating methane, an incredibly potent greenhouse gas. Another sign of hope is that just yesterday, Collins from Maine signed on as a Republican to support this methane CRA, this action. And that is an incredibly important sign, and we're hopeful that more Republicans will jump in. Many companies have also written to say that they, and declared that they support getting a methane emissions back under control. So those are some of the super big things that we are working on the legislative front. And again, we can't even take Democrats for granted. So every single phone call you make, every petition you sign, every letter you write, call district offices because they call their Washington office, every touch on a politician that says, I am not being quiet until you work on these issues, that matters. So let me ask Vicki to talk to you about the regulatory issues because they're fascinating and it's also a hopeful landscape. And then I'll jump in at the end just to close it out and get questions.
Thank you so much, Dominique. This time last year, we woke up to a New York Times op-ed from Dominique Browning that read, "Don't celebrate Earth Day, fight for it." And in the time it's taken for the Earth to orbit the sun, we now find ourselves in a place where we have gone from facing really serious, unprecedented threats to the foundations of environmental law, to the world leaders gathered, all lifting their voices and deepening with great seriousness their commitment to climate action, and our own country committing to cut in half our climate pollution by 2030. How did that happen? How did that happen? That happened because of all of you. That happened because of Mom's Clean Air Force bearing witness for 4 years to unprecedented attacks on the health of our children, all across the country, all communities, military moms, Latina moms, Christian moms, moms of all faith and colors and conviction, united by a world where they wanted to protect their children from the harms that were being rolled back and undone. That happened because of Big Tent USA. That happened because a group of people said, we can do better. We can fight for our democracy. We can renew our democracy. This is not a destination. This is a journey that requires all of us to continue to work on every day. And the reason history was changed today, and it was changed because all of you, and it happened in 365 days. 365 days. We have a lot of work to do, and our work is just beginning. But the reason we have this moment of this beacon of hope for our democracy, for tackling the climate crisis, is because of all of you. And so let's talk about sort of the threats of the Trump administration and where we're at and where we're going. I want to be really clear. The threats were unlike anything I've ever faced in 30 years of working on these issues. They were corrupt. It was massive. It was sweeping. It was very dark. And we did, a lot of work to try to shed light on the corruption and to try to protect the foundations of environmental law. And because of groups like Mom's Clean Air Force, because the environmental community locked arms and stood together, because state attorneys general were courageous in raising their voices and litigating against this really unprecedented attack, our country has the sound foundations of environmental law to build from. Took people caring and wanting to. Just in the last few months, we went into federal district court in Montana, and we blocked and vacated Trump's efforts to censor public health science. A day before the inauguration of a new president, Trump's last day in office on January 19th, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the DC Circuit struck down his attempt to overturn President Obama's Clean Power Plan. It was something that Trump had campaigned on in rallies all across the country, saying, I'm going to take down Obama's Clean Power Plan. Well, on January 19th, 2021, his efforts to do that got struck down. We have vacated since then efforts to refuse to act on landfill pollution that harms our communities and discharges methane and benzene. We have just today reversed the proposed, the Trump administration's sweeping attack on California's authority and authority of other states to protect millions of people from tailpipe pollution and to have clean car standards. And when President Biden was inaugurated, not only did he sign an executive order saying, we're going to restore science and we're going to move forward in a way that is consistent with the law, he identified 104 actions that the Trump administration had pursued to roll back really vital protections for clean air and clean water, and said, we're going to move fast. We're going to fix those. So, we do have work to do to fix the damage that has been done. And we need to spring ahead. We need to seize this moment. And we need to do so in a way that's durable. These are not Republican issues. These are not Democrat issues. These are not independent issues. These are American issues. When the president stood up today and raised his voice to the world and said, I'm going to slash climate pollution by 50%, that was buoyed by over 400 companies that had said, we want you to do this, President Biden. That's how we make change durable, right? When we have our young people calling for leadership, holding us all accountable, telling our leaders to lead, we have our moms calling on our leaders to lead, and when we have over 400 companies saying to the President of the United States, we can cut climate pollution in half, do it. We're behind you. We're ready. Let's go. And so in this moment, we have some important work to do to spring forward. And as Dominique indicated, a big part of that is the president's proposal to invest $2 trillion, the American Jobs Plan, in infrastructure. And $174 billion of that would be directed to helping our country save the American auto industry. Save the American auto industry by ensuring that we are doing a far better job building the batteries and the component parts and the vital pieces we need to shift to zero emitting vehicles. Because right now, that innovation, those investments are happening in China and Europe. And so if we're going to have jobs 10, 15 years from now, we're going to have jobs in a couple of years in Michigan, in Ohio, and in Tennessee, where GM just announced a $2 billion investment in a new battery manufacturing facility. We need to be the innovators. We need to invest in manufacturing so that all of those communities that have been so important in American manufacturing can innovate and be vibrant for generations to come. So we can invest in those charging stations so that no one has any anxiety about buying a zero emitting vehicle because they know they can charge anywhere they need to. So it's, these investments and all of this, the debate over the American Jobs Plan really unfold from now through the end of the summer, early fall. And we need your help getting those major investments across the finish line. They will mean so much in providing real jobs in clean energy and clean transportation that really help our nation make this transition and keep jobs in America and stay competitive now and for generations to come. And on the standard side, there's just an enormous amount we need to do and are doing to address the major sources of climate and air pollution. And many of them are all the same. As Dominique indicated, the biggest sources of climate pollution are the biggest sources of deadly particle pollution, of smog forming contaminants, toxic air contaminants that harm our communities and neighborhoods. And those big sources are power plants, our transportation sector, and oil and gas methane. And there's an urgency, and we have a narrow window to try to do all we can to adopt well-designed, effective pollution standards that are going to be anchored in economics and science and advanced technologies to take a huge step forward in addressing these major sources of climate and air pollution. And if we do it right, we'll advance justice, and we will help deliver cleaner, healthier air to the communities and neighborhoods who have been left behind for far too long in making clean air progress. And so by plugging those orphan wells and getting that legislation in place that Dominique indicated, we're also mitigating a lot of the methane that's just discharging and seeping out of the ground. By working with Senator Schumer and building bipartisan support next week when the Congressional Review Act disapproval resolutions before the Senate, and we need some more Republican support, we need your help. We are setting the foundation for September, when the Biden administration will unveil a historic new set of clean air standards to address the methane pollution, not just from new oil and gas wells, but from all of those existing wells. This will be historic, these September pollution standards. They start next week with the vote in the Senate on the Congressional Review Act disapproval resolution. We are looking at a historic step in adopting new clean car standards, new standards for freight trucks. And what is that anchored in? That's anchored in the action that was announced today to stop attacking California and the states that have been leading, because on May 6th, California is going to announce that they are moving forward with bold, new clean car standards, and that will catalyze the Biden administration to act and to lead and to do more. In August, we'll see a next generation of those standards that address mercury and arsenic and acid gases from coal plants that Dominique mentioned. We still have more work to do. And so look for that in August. So over the next several months, there are a number of crucial actions that are designed to address the most dangerous and largest sources of climate and air pollution in America. And if we have your support and your help and all hands on deck, we can do our part so that every child in America has the opportunity to live in a world where they're free of the scourge of air pollution. They can reach her or his full potential, and we're charting the pathway to climate safety. So thank you for all you've done. It's remarkable where we've come in the last 365 days, and I couldn't be more profoundly grateful.
Thank you so much, Vicki. As always, you are so inspiring. There are some really wonderful questions in the chat box, and actually want to wrap up my comments by noting a couple of them. I don't think we should talk about a green economy. We have an economy. And just like we don't talk about a different kind of economy that includes technology, our economy absorbs innovation and new technology as it grows and evolves. And I think it's a mistake for us to think about one economy and a green economy. Instead, I agree that we need to invest more and more in innovation, and the government has an enormous role to play in this, just like it did with the internet. So if we can all pull together, that will really go a long way. I don't spend a lot of time trying to convince deniers that climate change exists, because some people are never going to believe in science. But usually what it comes down to is that people don't think the solutions are solutions that they're comfortable with. I don't think we have an either or of regulation versus innovation. I think in a functioning government, those things are married, they twin, they inform one another. And that's when things are in a healthy kind of equilibrium. Companies that are making products want regularity, they want predictability, they don't want the yo-yo effect of executive orders being done and undone, of regulations being done and undone. So if we can all get our goals together and fight for cleaning things up, I think we will have a healthier economy, and we will certainly have healthier people. And most of all, I think we'll have a healthier democracy. I think that fighting against complacency is incredibly important, and so is fighting against despair. And I do believe that we can make government work for us. If anything, I think we protect our democracy by being part of the lifeblood of democracy, and that is citizenship. So I'll stop there and open it up.
Okay, there are so many great questions here. I will, I'll start at the top and try to work through all of them. How deeply did the brain drain under the former guy impact the EPA, and how will Administrator Regan rebuild it? That's for Vicki, I'm sure.
The impacts were real. They were serious. At the same time, there are a number of really talented, dedicated EPA experts that weathered the 4 years. One of the things that Mom's Clean Air Force did was to celebrate the experts at EPA, and to kind of separate those public servants from the political team that was really working to dismantle EPA and its mission during the Trump era. I think that helped with morale. I think there were a lot of things that helped with convey that, that the American people supported them. And so it's a reason a number of people stayed. So there's a lot of work that can still be done. At the same time, President Biden's just recently submitted budget request provides for significantly expanding EPA's resources, and that's an investment that's important now and for years to come.
Great. What is Gina McCarthy, the former administrator? What is her role in the White House? And how much influence does she have over policy? How does it sort of, there's so many different, well, I'll just put this with another question, which is that President Biden is trying to embed climate into every department, and who's overseeing that and who's measuring the impact of that. So, and who has his ear on this?
So that is Gina McCarthy's job, essentially, to integrate all of that. It's a very smart approach, an all-of-government approach, because we now have seen how climate chaos has a huge impact on everything from defense to interior to, I mean, you name it. There's not a single department that is unaffected by climate change. Therefore, taking that into consideration as part of the work is incredibly important. And McCarthy's role is, I think, as a convener, making sure that these things are all happening across the board.
Okay, so we have a question a little bit about offsets that, we're always looking for big tenters to have actions to take. And I think this is Jill's question, that large companies are paying southern pine forest owners to save the forests. And in addition, they get carbon offsets for this, and it's a win-win. So would an action item be for us to write to the companies and urge them to continue this practice? Would that have an effect? What would get the companies to do more of this and to do more good in general? Does letter writing work? What kind of things influence companies?
That is worth several hours of conversation. The whole offset conversation is incredibly complicated right now and rife with corruption and distortion, and it's a mess. And people who follow this carefully will tell you it is a mess. Some companies are doing the right thing and are offsetting in ways that are legitimate, and others plant the same tree over and over and over again and call it an offset. It's kind of the Wild West out there, and so that's all I can really say, because once you get into it very deeply, it is so complicated, and it is not the answer for how we're going to get where we need to get. Sadly, as well.
Okay, we have this increasingly unstable electric grid, and friends hear about the problems with energy storage technology. So what do we tell friends when we try to steer them to clean energy, when they say, but wait, it's not that stable and there are real storage issues? How do we get them to adopt it?
We have a lot of work to do to have kind of a clean and resilient grid. There's an enormous amount of progress we can make in a really rapid time in delivering both clean and reliable and affordable and resilient. And part of the infrastructure investments that are reflected in the American Jobs Plan are designed to help our country take a major step forward in those investments. We're also seeing that there are some really good examples in parts of the country where major power companies are slashing their pollution, keeping their rates low, and providing reliable power. And so here in my home state in Colorado, just a few weeks ago, Xcel Energy, our largest power provider, announced a plan to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 85% by 2030. And to do that using a combination of utility scale wind, utility scale solar, and large scale storage, and some limited utilization of gas. And they do have a little bit of nuclear on their system here. And it's really, I think, remarkable that we have the technologies today to do that. And the way they're ensuring that it's resilient is they're investing as part of that effort to decarbonize. They're investing in shoring up the grid and in ensuring that we have kind of greater access to renewables to provide kind of reliable power. And we're at a place that's really exciting in that clean energy is now outcompeting fossil energy. And so one of the things that's just recently happened here is that we have a really large and important steel mill that has been long in the community of Pueblo and provides over 1,000 jobs to Pueblo, Colorado. And they recently renegotiated to transition from the coal-based power that they had been purchasing for decades to utility scale solar, because the utility scale solar was cheaper. And we have the technology and the solutions to slash emissions, and to do it in a way that our manufacturers save money, and to do it in a way that in northeastern Colorado, we have family farms that are now staying in their families because they're hosting wind turbines, and young people in that community that are attending community college and getting trained as wind technicians and staying in the community because there are now job opportunities. So we can do this. We can slash greenhouse gas emissions, and when we slash that pollution, we're also cutting the mercury and all of the other harmful contaminants and provide affordable and reliable power.
Right. So polar bears and grizzly bears are now mating, and they are creating a new species or a cross species that can survive higher temperatures. So nature knows danger. Why not humans? Just, do you have a quick answer to that?
Yeah, my quick answer is that that species may be able to, I've read about that. Yes, it may be able to handle higher temperatures, but there's a food problem and there's a resting place problem. There will definitely be evolution that of plants, of animals. That is going to happen. But there's it's impossible for that to keep happening as things get hotter and hotter and hotter and we cross a point of no return.
Vicki, this is for you. So, and you've touched on this a little bit, but what is the best way in this very, very tightly controlled Congress to avoid this yo-yo effect of the regulations? What's the best way to actually solidify the these rules so that it can't be overturned or returned to, depending on who's in charge? And is there hope that we can do it now?
Yeah, really important question. Thank you. One of the things we found from the Obama administration was that the pollution standards that were durable were those that were adopted early in the administration. And so there are a number of reasons for that. One reason is because there's time to defend them in court and to solidify them that way. Another reason is because you're changing investments, and once the business community has made the investments in compliance, they're stable. There's just a lot less interest in undoing this. And so we're really putting a strong emphasis on action that is anchored in law, that is, no novel, untested interpretations, but firmly anchored in traditional interpretations of the law, thoroughly anchored in science and technology. So these aren't the kinds of actions that will, we hope, provoke the attention of the Supreme Court, and actions that are carried out with great priority and attention and focus, so that we can do all we can to solidify them by the end of 2022, and ideally by Labor Day of 2022, before we pivot out of Labor Day into the midterms, so we can defend them in court and we can work with the business community to solidify them. We also work really diligently to build private sector support as part of our advocacy for pollution standards. And that's another way you make them stable, because you have sort of the business bought in at the outset, and it's an important part of being successful and locking in really transformative change.
So you mentioned the Supreme Court. How do you Supreme Court proof a law? How are you looking for very specific? So the opposition will be looking for very specific things that they can take to the Supreme Court. How do you make it bulletproof?
It's we think about it all the time, and one of the things we're doing is we're undertaking what we call the Durability Initiative, and we're reaching out to kind of the top legal experts in the country to ensure that we've learned just as much as we can from the people who think about the Supreme Court, how we can do the very best work we possibly can to ensure that climate pollution standards, air pollution standards are designed to be durable. A couple of takeaways. One is, it's really important that, we anchor them in the plain language of the statute, and we avoid novel, unprecedented interpretations. this 6-3 Supreme Court is just going to have no patience for anything that's novel and that they haven't seen before. We also want to ensure that the health benefits and the climate benefits far outweigh the costs. It's really compelling when judges see something, when they can just see in a rational way that there are extraordinary climate benefits, extraordinary public health benefits that really just swamp the compliance costs. We need the public to stay engaged. You know, judges are people. And when judges understand that there's enormous public support for action, you know, that's real. You think about there've been some big changes in our society that I think people didn't see or anticipate would happen so quickly. And it happened because of public support. And then again, we really need private sector support. We need to be able to show to these judges, not only is the Environmental Protection Agency adopting rigorous, transformative pollution limits for new cars that are going to help drive us to a place where we eliminate all pollution from our cars, but GM is, and Ford is, and so we're making those investments in our private sector as well. And it's what government is doing is putting in place policy that is consonant with where we can see kind of private sector innovation.
Great. Do you have, either one of you, do you have any idea how many coal plants there are in the country? What kind of process there will be for shutting them down? And then we know that these clean energy jobs exist. Who is making sure that these clean energy jobs are actually in the same neighborhoods that the coal jobs are in? And so then I'm also going to add another question, just because it has to do with transitions. What's your thinking on nuclear? We know it's the cleanest fuel. Is it going to grow? Is it going to go away? You know, where is nuclear headed? They're completely unrelated, but not unrelated.
Dominique, do you want to?
No, Vicki, jump in on coal. You know the numbers.
So at the start of the Obama administration, there were about 300 gigawatts of coal-based power in our country. And if you do the analysis and look at sort of what's forecast in terms of retirements that are enforceable now, by 2030, we would have about 160 gigawatts of coal. We're also seeing a world where that coal is being utilized less and less as it's being displaced by other forms of power. At the same time, that remaining 160 gigawatts, a lot of it still does not have, to this day, modern pollution controls, and it doesn't have modern pollution controls for the nitrogen oxides that contribute to smog pollution. And so one of the things we're encouraging the Biden administration to do is to ensure that every coal unit across the eastern United States that contributes to smog that harms millions of people up and down the eastern seaboard, that every single one of those coal plants is asked to do its fair share and finally modernizing its pollution controls for nitrogen oxides, so that the coal plants, the lignite coal plants in Texas and in the upper Midwest that didn't do what they could in terms of slashing their mercury pollution, they do. And that we tighten up the mercury pollution limits. So there's just, we have bag houses and selective catalytic reduction and advanced modern mercury limits on every coal unit. And when you ask those coal units to bear responsibility for that pollution and you internalize those costs, what you find is that clean energy outcompetes the coal. And when we say it's no longer okay, it's no longer acceptable for you to be imposing this harm on others, we need you to adopt modern pollution controls. It accelerates the transition to clean energy. Over to you, Dominique.
Again, so clear. 241 coal plants, plants themselves, and across the country, generating about 23% of our electricity. So actually, far more than many of us think, because there's been so much kill coal propaganda out there. We are actually still using quite a lot of coal. And Vicky's point about modernizing and cleaning up is an incredibly important point across the board. The bigger companies in the oil and gas world are themselves actually wanting regulations that clean things up. The problem is that across the board, people are not either enforcing their or they're not installing the equipment that's needed to clean things up, and it's causing actually quite a lot of turmoil even within the industry, and that's another thing that's kind of driving desire for clear and strong regulations.
I would just add that the American Jobs Plan, again, this is the infrastructure investment that the president has proposed, is really important in helping the communities that are going to be impacted by this transition, the communities that have provided coal to America for generations. And we can't leave those communities behind. We can't leave those people behind. And adopting and enacting the American Jobs Plan is really, really important, and ensuring that we make this transition in a way that is truly equitable, truly just. And just in the last couple of days, the United Mine Workers, for the first time ever in the many, many years I've worked on these issues, indicated they support solutions like the American Jobs Plan because they understand the transition is happening. The market is driving change, regulations are driving change, and their communities need the support.
I want to jump in also quickly. First of all, Bitcoin, yes, it is outrageous, and people are making a lot of noise. People like Jeremy Grantham are on television talking about what an energy suck this is. But I do want to touch on plastics because I think that is a huge issue on the horizon. There are many, many organizations working on plastic waste disposal, and we all are hearing and reading these horrifying stories about how now there is literally microparticles of plastic in the air that we are breathing. It is an enormous problem. What isn't being focused on enough, and I am hoping that EDF can become a leader in this area, is the front end, the plastic creation, the refineries and the cracker plants and the build out of an infrastructure, which the gas industry is really relying on. That is moving now, I think, from the Gulf Coast, where it is a disaster of epic proportions. We actually live in a country where it is okay to know that there is a cancer alley with skyrocketed rates of childhood leukemia. But the weather in the Gulf has become incredibly disrupted, as we know. And so there's movement up into the Ohio River Valley to be near other oil reserves, and also to be in a more stable environment. So it would be really important to get regulations under control and enforce them before these plants build out and pollute the way they do. It's also incredibly important for consumers not to waste as much plastic as we do. And I like to talk about plastic as a precious resource. There is a lot that has happened because of plastic. It is an incredible gift. When you look at a tube in a premature baby's vein, that tube keeping that child alive can only be made out of plastic. So rather than think of plastic as something that we can just be profligate about and throw away and waste, do as we do, if we could all become less reliant on using plastic, that would go a long way towards helping the problem. But the front end, the pollution in the creation of plastic, is an enormous problem that we're just beginning to grapple with. Katie, I just wanted to answer that question.
Yeah, thanks so much. I mean, we could stay on all night, but I just want to say thanks Dominique, thanks, Vicki. This was so interesting, so informative, and we really appreciate it. We're going to send out to everybody some links for ideas for tomorrow. And please come back and join us next time. And Dominique and Vicki, we want to have you back when there's more to report on. We just
Love
love
to.
having you here tonight.
Happy
Thank you
Earth
so much.
Day. Thank you all.
Happy
Thank
Earth
you,
Day.
Sue. Thank you, co-founders. Thank you,
Yes.
everybody. Thank you, Big Tent.
Be well, everyone.
Be well. And onward.
Yes.